So version 2 bunting has a front and a reverse side as well, with these, as you can see, these nice neat edges and beautiful pointy corners as well. It uses the same technique to attach the bunting tape, but I'm going to show you now how to go about making this nice neat flag with a reverse. So this type of bunting is great for making a statement garland, and for mine I've chosen this rather dashing mustachioed fabric, and I've also already put my letters on using the same method as I did before. So these are stuck on using bondle web, so the iron-on adhesive. As you can see, the edges of the flag are straight. I've just used a normal pair of fabric scissors on these. They didn't need to be pinked because those edges are going to be hemmed, so they won't fray. And then, so not only do you need your front flags, but then your reverse flags. And so I'm going to alternate between plain and the moustaches, because then if you don't want the motto showing, you've still got a nice alternating pattern on the back. So, and then I've got my binding tape as well. I'm going to be using blue this time. Okay. So to piece your flags together, first of all, you want to take your front side of your flag and lay that with your pattern facing up towards you. Then you want to get the reverse side of that flag. For this one, it's the same for me. And now I'm going to lay that pattern down. So it's a pattern sandwich. Okay, so you want to match your edges up as best as you can. Okay, so in version 2 we're going to use the sewing machine to stitch these up. It really speeds up the process, particularly when you're doing double-sided flags, and it gives you a really neat finish for when you turn your flags inside out and you give them a good iron. It gets that really nice crisp finish. You can do them by hand still, it would just be a bit more of a labour of love and a little bit more patience needed. So now I've got my flags in position, I'm going to pin them, so always keeping in mind which direction the sewing machine is going to be taking the fabric in, and I want to be able to pull the pins out nice and easily. So my fabric's going through the machine in this direction, so I want to be using the pins with the point pointing towards the needle of my sewing machine. Okay, so putting my first pin in. When you get more confident, you probably won't even need to pin these, especially if you cut them accurately. Accurate cutting is essential. So just keep pinning round until you're happy and they're in the position where you're ready to feel secure starting your sewing. So I'm just going to pop just a couple more pins in here. There we go, and one more just to demonstrate. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine. Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine. So you've put your flag sandwich, so to speak, under your presser foot, and we're going to be stitching with a generous ½ centimetre seam allowance, so just over ½ centimetre. You don't need anything bigger really, because it's not taking any weight or pressure, so ½ centimetre will be absolutely fine. So I always start with my needle down, and just going to do a reverse stitch at the beginning. So come forward a few stitches and then back a few stitches. That will just keep it nice and secure. Even though you are going to be binding over the top of this, you just want to make sure the sewing's as good as it can be, so it lasts a long time and can be used for celebration after celebration. So I'm just going to sew around the perimeter of my lower V of my triangle. So I'm going to leave that top open and just sew around the lower V with a ½ centimetre seam allowance. So here we go. Doesn't make for great viewing, I appreciate watching somebody else do the sewing, but I just want to show you that when we get down to the bottom of the V, you want to go down, keep going down until you can imagine that where you leave your needle in and lift your foot up and pivot, that's going to bring you back to another ½ centimetre running up the other side. Okay, so you can just take that pin out and come back up the other side with your ½ centimetre. I've just got standard stitch length here. I'm using white cotton, so hopefully you'll be able to see it. If not against this, then certainly against the binding that I'm going to use. And when you get to that upper section again, you're just going to reverse stitch in that ½ centimetre seam allowance and then cut your threads. Okay, Just tidy up any threads as you go. My scissors vanished. Just makes it a bit easier. So just snip off any loose threads and just make sure that you've caught both sides. So you should be able to see that now I have sewn this side and this side, but I have left this opening. So we're going to be able to turn this inside out. But before we do, in order to get a nice sharp point, we're just going to snip this off. So you don't want to get too close to that stitch at the bottom there, but as close as you safely can. Just take your scissors and snip that corner off there. So we'll just tidy as we go. And then we're going to turn this flag inside out. I'm just going to move my machine back a little bit so you can see a bit better. So just roll it and you can get your finger in there. Don't be tempted to put your scissors in there because it will go through. As gentle as you are, there's been so many mistakes made. If you want to use anything, I have my trusty chopstick, so which is really good for just poking just through in the bottom there and getting as nice as sharp. Just give it a little squeeze, a little twist around, and you should get a really nice sharp corner there. But obviously you can see it's not looking very crisp along the edges, and we've got some little ears up here as well. Don't be tempted to trim those off yet. You're going to take this over to your iron, and as you iron, I just want to make sure that you can see this, you're going to take that lower piece of fabric and then you're going to roll the seam on top. So make sure that you're rolling that top seam over the lower one to make sure that you're getting your seam out as far as possible. You could even use your chopstick again in there to just run it along the seam, because what you don't want is to lose any of your flag when you iron into lost space in the flag. You just want to make sure that your hem there is as crisp as possible, and take that over to the iron and iron your flag out. As I say, don't be afraid to get a bit of steam going as long as your material allows for it. It will give you a nicer finish at the end. It's me down here, so I haven't got my back quite as far to you. And as you can see, I'm just rolling that top seam over to make sure I've got as much of the flag out as possible and to get some nice, neat finishes. So just be careful because it will be hot. And now's the time to trim. So if you've got any uneven bits at the top here, can you see there? I'm just going to trim this off and just even it up, okay? But you can see here, there's a really nice, neat finish along the edge and a nice point as well at the end of the flag. So let's just trim those last parts up. Literally, it doesn't have to be too fussy. All right, it's all going to get stitched in, but the straighter everything is, the easier it will be to sew in the next step. Okay, so that is flag number 1. So you need to continue doing that with the rest of your flags, and I'll see you back here for the next step. So now you've got all of your triangles pressed and neatened up at the edges, and they're all looking very crisp and smart. This is where it's particularly important to make sure now that you've got all your flags in the right order for sewing. So again, you're still going to be sewing from right to left, as it were, because as you feed in to your sewing machine, the first flag that you sew will in fact be the furthest on the right, so the last flag as you're reading it. So for me, I've got a blank, then the letter D, N, I, K, and a blank again. And you just want to turn them over as well to make sure that your backs are how you want them as well, so you've got a nice alternating pattern or whatever you've chosen on the back. Now's the time to do that rather than unpicking your binding when you realise that it's not the right way round when you've stitched them in. So you're going to get your bias binding tape. Mine is it's going to be tricky to undo, I can see that now. So just going to snip along here, there we go, and undo that. Okay, and then bring your machine or take your project to your machine. I'm going to use, controversially, white thread against a blue binding. I would usually do a blue thread to blend in with the binding, but I just thought it might give the potential for you to be able to see a bit better on the screen there, and also contrasting colours can look really, really smart, and especially when they're done on the machine, because you just get that slightly cleaner finish than if you were doing a hand sew job. So I'm just going to change the settings on my sewing machine, because effectively your top stitching, although you want this to hold your flags in place, you want a slightly larger stitch than you'd have for stitching your flags together. So I used a 2.2 or a 2.5, sorry, actually, for stitching my flags together, and I'd go anywhere between a 3 and a 3.5 depending on what your machine has available to you. So I'm just going to put mine up a little bit here, so a 3.5. So I've already cut my binding tape to length, and so what you want to do is finger press that fold. So here's your whole width, okay, and you want to fold it in on itself, so with the open pieces on the inside, fold it in, keep those edges nice and flush to one another. Okay, and you're going to put this folded with the open sides to your right into under your presser foot, and I'd suggest that you want to, oh, my thread's a bit caught here. I'm just going to sort this out before we go on any further. Okay, so I'm back, my thread's sorted out, and I've got my binding tape folded in half and put under my presser foot here, ready to go. I'm going to start with my needle down, and I'm probably about a centimetre in from the end of my binding tape, just so nothing gets sort of pulled into the machine as I start to work. And as I said earlier, I've allowed 25 centimetres of binding at each end of the binding to allow for a bit of a run off at each end and a hanging loop as well. I've just realised you can't see what I'm doing with my finger here. So we'll start by doing a back stitch, so running forward a few stitches and then reversing to make that nice and secure. And as I say, I'm about 3 millimetres away from the edge. Okay, so go at your own speed. It doesn't have to be a race here. Okay, so just keep moving forwards. And we're going to measure when we think we get to about 25 centimetres. So we've run through approximately 25 centimetres of the bunting tape already. So you'll just want to take a tape measure and make sure that from the end to where your needle's in, that's 25 centimetres. So keep your needle in your project now, okay? Lift your presser foot and take your first flag. So you're going to be working with your message facing up to you if you've got a message, or if not, your front panels of your flags. So mine's a blank, this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert it in between that fold of the bias binding. So it's going to go half bias binding, then the flag, and then the second half of the bias binding is going to fold over the top. I don't pin this when I do it. What I do is I just insert the corner of the flag right up to the needle, close my presser foot, or lower my presser foot, take a couple of stitches so I'm just in the top of the flag, then I hold on to the rest of the flag and finger press down that binding, making sure that the edges are nice and even, and then just sew with that 2 to 3 millimetres again. And then when I approach the end of my flag, I am going to slow down, and just at the very end where the flag stops and the new piece of bias binding, or the blank piece of bias binding, starts again, I'm going to leave my needle in again and raise my presser foot and take my next flag, so making sure it's the right letter for my motto to read correctly. And again, just wiggling that corner right up to where the needle is and lowering the presser foot. Taking those first few stitches so it holds the flag in place, and then holding on to the other end of my flag, making sure I've got half the bias binding, then the flag, and then folding over the other half of the bias binding across the top and finger pressing into place. Okay, and then you can stitch again. And you repeat for all your flags. And there you have it, your secured binding. So giving any of your projects a final press will always make sure that they look extra professional. And then we've just got one final step. We're just going to stitch in the loopholes. So we're going to trim off any loose ends that we've got, fold our loop over by 5 centimetres, and then just run a few stitches across here. What I always say in terms of hanging bunting is just exercise caution. If you've got children or pets in the house or are going to be around where you're hanging your bunting. And also as well, all the fabrics I've suggested today are meant for indoor use really. So if you are going to be hanging them outside, they will withstand a shower, but not for prolonged use outside. Don't leave them outside all summer, otherwise your bunting won't last the course. And there we have it, your double-sided bunting garland. So you could hang it with the alternating flags this direction, or with your motto on this direction. Super smart if you've got an event that you're running, or if you'd like to give as a gift, or if you've just got a message that you'd like to remind yourself of and have a nice wall hanging in the house. If you've enjoyed the video today and want to get started super quickly, I do have packs available of pre-cut fabric triangles and letters with the binding as well. They come with instructions, so they're ready to sew and iron, and a really nice quick way to get started on this project. You can choose your own wording, you just pop it in with your order, and these are being shipped once a week at the moment. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed your Crafternoon tutorial in association with BBC Radio Northampton. It's been so much fun. Helen Blaby, thanks for organising this. It's a genius idea, and hope it brings lots of people together whilst we're all physically apart at the moment. I'm really looking forward to seeing Lucy from This Will Die, and also Fiona from Cosy Rosie coming up over the next 2 Wednesdays. They'll be doing crocheting and knitting, so do register your interest on the BBC Northampton website, and you will get sent the original link, but I'm sure they'll also have tutorials up after their Crafternoons as well for you to follow along and make your own knitted and crocheted bunting. If you like what you've seen here today, then please follow me. I'm on all the usual socials. You can find me on Instagram at In The Snug, and Facebook and Twitter on Sewing in the Snug. It's been great to see you all. Thanks for coming. Take care. Bye.